One can hardly imagine the history of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists without this personality. This man is a symbol, an example of an uncompromising politician, capable of living and dying for the sake of an idea. Wishing to get to the truth and dispel the well-established myth of the Soviet ideology, researchers sifted through tons of truthful and fabricated documents. But the true essence of the phenomenon of one of the leaders of the 20th century of Ukrainian national liberation movement is still little known to a wide audience. So who is he, Stepan Bandera? Why was he destined by history? The village of Stary Ugrinev in Ivano-Frankivsk region, the parental home where the future leader of the command of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, Stepan Bandera, was born on January 1, 1909. It is clear that formation of his personality took more than one day, and this extraordinary person was formed throughout his childhood and youth. It's important to understand what kind of people surrounded Stepan when he was growing up.
Щоб розуміти, хто був такий батько.
To understand who Bandera's father was, I can briefly say that apart from his duties as a priest, he was a man who actively worked in the national educational sphere, on the territory where he worked as a prior. Besides, he was a member of parliament, as was said then, an ambassador of the parliament of the West Ukrainian People's Republic, and later he volunteered to be a chaplain of the Ukrainian Galician Army. People who were friends of his family were exceptional individuals and made a deep impression on Stepan the child and later on Stepan the teenager. Yaroslav Veselovsky, journalist and member of the Vienna Parliament, editor of the Letter from Prosvita and Dilo publications. Ivan Kurovets, a famous doctor, newspaper publisher in Kalush and Lviv. Famous Ukrainian painter and sculptor Mikhailo Havrilko. The Hlodzinsky family, where Bandera's mother came from, represented a pleiad of enlighteners, teachers and priests. All these things in unison, his close circle, events, thoughts, aspirations of people close to him, developed Stepan as a nationally conscious personality. The national patriotic feelings of the young man were tempered thanks to the Plast Youth Scout organization. As a member of the latter, he not only improved his physical self, but also traveled around villages and taught Ukrainian history and language to representatives of the Prosvita organization, helping people to get to know themselves. Whatever business he was involved in, he had to be the first everywhere, and wherever he went, every person he talked to, there was only one main subject of conversation: the idea of the fight for Ukrainian independence. The events of the Ukrainian National Democratic Revolution of 1917 to 1921 also made a big impression on the young man. At that time, the young man even couldn't imagine how illusory his hopes and long-lasting struggle for the idea of Ukrainian independence would be. We do not know how the fate of young Stepan would have been different if it were not for the event that took place at the end of 1929 in Vienna. At that time, the former colonel of the Austro-Hungarian army, Yevhen Konovalets, established the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, having united several circles of his countrymen. Stepan Bandera was one of the first to join. From that time onwards, he became an implacable fighter for Ukrainian statehood. This is precisely the moment when Ukrainians understood they had to defend their interests, and in order to defend them, they needed to reach out to the general Ukrainian public. It was at that time that Stepan Bandera, as regional leader of the OUN, offers a new concept for the development of the organization on Ukrainian lands. It was about enlisting the broader masses of the population in the process of defending national rights and interests. At schools, students demanded they be taught subjects in the Ukrainian language. In the course of the anti-trust campaign, the Ukrainian community used every opportunity not to buy Polish goods. First and foremost, this meant sugar, alcohol, and tobacco. The organization actively promoted a healthy lifestyle. Stepan, who physically tempered his body and spirit, was convinced that only a healthy Ukrainian could take care of himself, defend himself, and live with dignity in his Ukrainian state. The political force led by Bandera observes the idea: to build the Ukrainian state, everyone must start small from oneself. And later, this idea was embodied by all members of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. They believed that everyone needed to defend his home, defend his village, and build the new Ukrainian state in this way. With the assassination of Minister Bronislaw Pieratsky in June 1934, Polish police carried out mass arrests. In 1936, for membership in the OUN and for arranging the murder of the Minister of the Interior Affairs, Bandera was sentenced to death, which was later replaced with life imprisonment. In the opinion of Ukrainian historians, it was the most sensational law proceeding, and Bandera showed his courage and resilience during the judicial sitting. He was extremely defiant. The trial transcript was published in the Ukrainian and Polish press. The name of Bandera immediately became known to the general public. Even Soviet newspapers published Bandera's portrait with the accompanying text, saying that Ukrainian patriots are fighting against Polish occupants. In September 1939, the occupation of Poland by Soviet and German troops ended in a fraternal meeting between the advanced forces of the Wehrmacht and the Red Army, friendly handshakes and joint parades. At that time, Stepan Bandera manages to escape from a Polish prison. Most of all, he was struck by the general mood of his countrymen, who met the Red Army with particular enthusiasm. When Soviet troops entered Ukrainian territory in 1939, local people welcomed them. They really welcomed them with bread and salt and with blue and yellow symbols. But after they saw how these symbols were destroyed, after they had witnessed the arrests of Ukrainian families a month after the evictions began, people realized who really had occupied their land. After the murder of Yevhen Konovalets by Soviet special services, Colonel Andriy Melnik became the leader of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists in 1939. However, a group of young nationalists led by Stepan Bandera, who were released from prisons after occupation of Poland by Germany and were less aware of the activities of the organization, began to push OUN's leaders to refuse from delaying tactics. Especially dangerous was the further orientation of OUN towards Hitler's Germany. In February 1940, Bandera sent a letter to Melnik. He informed that he had taken over leadership. A year later, the Revolutionary Command of OUN unanimously elected Stepan Bandera chairman. Under his leadership, OUN becomes an active revolutionary organization. To reveal the true intentions of Germany towards Ukraine, the idea to proclaim the act of renewal of Ukrainian state came to OUN members in the first days of the German-Soviet War. The solemn ceremony took place in Lviv on June 30, 1941. The leaders of the Reich regarded this action as a conspiracy by supporters of Ukrainian independence. The police arrested Bandera and his associates and brought them to Krakow.
Німців це заскочило. Бо деякі люди кажуть, що німці мали договорення. Це нонсенс абсолютно. Я знаю.
The Germans were shocked because people say that the Germans had arrangements. I know that this is nonsense, but 3 days later, State Secretary Kunt flew to Krakow from Berlin, where he spoke to Bandera. I found a transcript of this conversation that was kept in California, but not in German archives. It was kept in Himmler's archive, and that conversation was very aggressive on the part of Kunt.
Хто дозволив цю акцію у Львові? А Бандера каже, я це зробив.
He says, who allowed this event to be held in Lviv? And Bandera answered, I did this. I received a mandate from the Ukrainian people. He said this very boldly. Kunt said, no, you cannot do this because only the Führer of the German Reich has this right. And Bandera calmly answered, no, only the Ukrainian people will take political decisions in Ukraine.
Може для вас це звучати, що то таке собі маленька акція. Я вам скажу.
It may sound like some kind of insignificant action, but it was the most important act not only in the life of Stepan Bandera, but also in the life of the Ukrainian people. If he had not taken this position, Ukrainians would not have had anything to be proud of, and the insurgent army and the history of the struggle for the Ukrainian state would not have existed.
Української повстанської армії і історії боротьби за свою державу.
After their arrest, Stepan Bandera and Yaroslav Stetsko were brought from Krakow to Berlin, where they were taken into prison on Alexanderplatz, and some time later they were imprisoned at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. The Nazis imprisoned hundreds of Ukrainian patriots in concentration camps. It was the beginning of mass terror. Stepan Bandera's brothers, Oleksa and Vasil, were tortured to death in the Auschwitz concentration camp. At that time, the Ukrainians unmasked the true face of the Germans. They had realized that the Nazis were an enemy of Ukrainian statehood, an enemy of the Ukrainian people. However, anti-Ukrainian propaganda continues to insist on accusations against Stepan Bandera of collaborating with the Nazis and numerous crimes against his own and other peoples. Honestly speaking, the most common myths about Bandera are contrary to true facts. Indeed, Bandera had nothing to do with what happened on Ukrainian lands during the war, for the simple reason that he was arrested and served his time either in prisons or in concentration camps. His opportunity to have influence over some developments of the Ukrainian movement was minimal or simply impossible. There was a cult of Bandera, and Ukrainian people used this cult and often called themselves adherents of Bandera. So their enemies also called them adherents of Bandera, but in any case, it did not mean that Bandera led them. In fact, the leaders of this movement actually lived exactly on Ukrainian lands. After the war, Stepan Bandera had the opportunity to settle in any European provincial town and enjoy a quiet family life. However, he preferred the long struggle with the Soviet authorities, full of hardships and dangers. As head of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, Bandera understood perfectly well what role he played and how dangerous he was to his enemies. After he had been elected as head of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, again in 1955, realizing his role, he said with a bit of humor, "I accept this verdict." Agents of the Soviet Special Services did not abandon attempts to abduct or liquidate the leader of the Ukrainian nationalists. In the period of 1947 to 1959, the security service of the OUN, in cooperation with the German criminal police, managed to thwart several attempts to kill Bandera. But on October 15, 1959, foreign radio stations and the press reported that the leader and ideologist of the revolutionary struggle for Ukrainian state independence, the leader of the foreign military units of the OUN, Stepan Bandera, died at the hand of an assassin in Munich. The main aim of instigators of the killing of Stepan Bandera was to cause members of the Ukrainian movement to quarrel, deprive them of the national flag, to cause infighting between the different parts of the Ukrainian movement who had tensions in their mutual relationship, and to lay the blame on each other or other parties. It was the main task because 2 years after the murder, the identity of the assassin still was not known. How was it done? That's why conflicts continued, although the majority of members of the Ukrainian insurgent army and OUN understood everything perfectly well. In October 1962, a federal court in West Germany sentenced the murderer of Bandera, by that time a political émigré by the name of Bohdan Stashinsky, to 8 years in prison. And 3 years later, the book Moscow Murderers of Bandera Before a Court, which soon became a world bestseller, was published in Munich. It included many little-known facts and documents testifying to the political background of the assassination of the leader of Ukrainian nationalists. The name of Stepan Bandera is known far beyond the borders of Ukraine. There is even a museum of Stepan Bandera in London. The original of his post-mortem plaster mask is kept there. There are also equally unique artifacts, such as the suit worn by him when he was killed, personal belongings, as well as items from the personal office of the OUN leader. Stepan Bandera was an ambiguous personality, but it can be definitely said that he was a patriot of Ukraine and waged an uncompromising fight against its enemies, a fight that inevitably had to end in his physical destruction, but left a heroic trail in Ukrainian history.